Hey, welcome back everyone to another broadcast of In the Trenches. I'm your host, Tom Morcus, and today I sit down with Andrew Tarvin, who is the creator of Humor That Works. Humor That Works has helped 25,000 people from more than 250 different organizations from all around the world use humor to achieve success and happiness in the workplace. And I brought Andrew onto the call today to talk about humor in the workplace, humor in the work you do as well, because as an entrepreneur, as a marketer, I do like to use humor in a context of, to capture attention, get people entertained, have more fun with the content I'm producing, and so that we can ultimately drive better results. In today's conversation, we dive into the engineering of humor. Is there a science or a mathematical model to humor? We talk about what makes good humor and bad humor in the workplace. Can humor exist in a PC culture? Things like Michael from The Office. Is that kind of humor acceptable in today's day and age? Could a movie like Ladybugs be produced and published today? And so Andrew dives in and answers all of these questions that I throw his way. And it was just a very enjoyable and fun conversation as far as I'm concerned. My big takeaway is that humor is something that can, one, actually be engineered. And there's some really good techniques and tactics, some pragmatical approaches to thinking about how to be humorous in a productive capacity, both in the workplace and just on your own. And we covered those kind of in depth. So you should be able to walk away with this with a way to be more humorous in a positive and productive way. And the other kind of takeaway I have from this is just that you shouldn't censor yourself when it comes to being humorous, but you just want to make sure that your humor is something that uplifts and is inclusive. And so we kind of break down what that means. I'm not just throwing out superfluous words that have no meaning. We actually break down what it means to be positive and be inclusive in that regard, and how to do that in a way that can be beneficial to the people that you're speaking with, whether in the context of being an employer or employee, in the context also of solopreneurship or somebody doing any kind of marketing or online business, any kind of writing or content creation, and some good tips on how to use things like memes and how to respond to negative humor in a way that can still be positive and not send you down into this negative spiral that just drags the whole conversation down. So a lot of stuff. I hope you guys like today's interview. And if you do, make sure to leave a review. I'm on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, all over the place. Just search In the Trenches or In the Trenches with Tom Morcus. We're finally on all the platforms. So leave a review and share this. It really, that's how this thing spreads, and leaving a review anywhere really means a lot to me, and I really appreciate it. So thank you so much in advance for your support. All right, without further ado, let's get to today's interview. So Andrew, we're going to be talking about humor in the workplace today, but before we get to the funny jokes, tell me a little bit about how you got into this in the first place. It seems like an unusual career trajectory, I guess you could say. So give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, and that may be the biggest joke of all. I don't know, because when I tell people that I speak on humor in the workplace, and then I ask my background, and I tell them I have a degree in computer science and engineering, they're like, "Wait, what? That's not the background you expect." But yeah, so I've always been an engineer, always been obsessed with efficiency. To the point that I was even born 3 weeks early. So apparently even in the womb, I was like, I don't need a full 9 months. I'm ready to go right now. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, all through school trying to be as efficient as possible. I thought, smart for me was getting a 93% in all of my classes, because that was the lowest grade you could get and still get an A. And it got to the point that if I got a 94, 95, or worst case scenario, 100%, I was upset because it meant that I did more work than I had to do. And so that kind of naturally fit into an engineering mindset. So I went to the Ohio State University, got a degree in computer science and engineering. And after I graduated, started working at Procter & Gamble as an IT project manager, kind of well on that trajectory of what you would expect based on my personality assessment. So if you know your assessments, I'm a type A blue square conscientious INTJ with the sign of Aquarius. So that means I'm an ambitious, stubborn introvert who likes long walks on the beach. By myself. And so computer science and being an IT project manager and everything seemed to be the natural fit. But once I got to P&G, I kind of ran into a little bit of a problem, because I realized that you can't be efficient with humans. You can be efficient with things like computers, but you can't be efficient with people because of, emotions and feelings and people getting tired or stressed out or burned out. And so instead, you had to be effective. And I didn't necessarily have the skill set that I needed to be effective, but I had started doing improv and stand-up comedy in college and started to realize that some of those same skills you need to be effective in improv are some of the same skills you need to be effective in the workplace. So I started to explore that intersection, and that kind of got me started on that journey.
And so you were being a developer, moving to this, it's like, yeah, it doesn't seem like the natural path. Like, why, like, I guess, like, why even take it up as like something that you want to talk about? Because it seems like, I feel like with the developers I know, they usually make such a good living, and they, especially with like that typical personality type of like the developer engineer, like it's just kind of good, consistent, healthy living. Why take a chance on something like this that's kind of, well, I guess out there a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think a couple of things, and one is that I realized that humor was what was helping me with people, and in a way, it was kind of a way to program humans. And there is, when you get start to study comedy and see how it works, there's almost kind of a math to comedy. It's almost like math with words. And so, it was almost another form of engineering. That's why when I left, my self-proclaimed job title was humor engineer, because it was kind of taking that same mindset and process that I was using to do computer development and applying it to creating humor and using it effectively in the workplace. And so part of it was kind of an interesting passion and something that people weren't talking about. And a second part of it was that, I knew at P&G when I left P&G, they had a good project manager who kind of filled in my role. But when I create something like, the book Humor That Works, or the website, or some of the, programs that we create, those things don't exist in the world if I didn't create them. And so there's something kind of compelling about this idea that I'm, adding something to the world that wouldn't exist otherwise. And kind of one last touch is like, for me, and I'm happy to talk, deeper dive into it if you think it's interesting, but to me, I didn't see it all that big of a risk because of some things that I did prior to leaving. But to me, it wasn't this huge, like, oh, is it going to work or not? I had a good couple of reasons to believe that I would at least be, somewhat successful.
Well, actually, yeah, let's dovetail there first, because I am kind of curious about that. Then we'll come back to the humor piece. What was it about that, like, again, being kind of engineering mindset, kind of calculating risk, and then being able to decide which course of action to take? What was it about what you had, or what did you do to prepare to make that leap, to know like, yeah, this isn't just like throwing things at the wall, but like maybe there's some, with certainty you can make this leap or this transition, and it wouldn't, the risk was mitigated, we'll say. Like, what were those things that you were doing?
Well, it's a completely unsexy process. Like, I wish I had the, sexy, compelling story of, I was in a meeting one day and I got fed up and I, flipped over a table and stormed out and I left, and, it was all magic after that. But it's the unsexy process of creating a project plan. So I created a spreadsheet called Operation Leave Corporate America. And I had a checklist of all the things that I had to do to complete before I felt comfortable leaving. And this is, to borrow from marketing terms, I was giving myself reasons to believe I was successful. So, on that spreadsheet, I had things like make X number of dollars as a speaker or trainer, as a part, doing it as a side hustle and doing it part-time. Have a website that had some testimonials and a couple of images of me speaking. Have, a couple of products, or at least a book idea kind of in mind. Have enough savings so that, if I lived on dollar pizza and ramen noodles here in New York City, that I could survive and skimp by for at least a year. Have, all these different things completed. Make sure that and even test myself as well. Like, I would take a week of vacation while at P&G and be like, okay, can I work on my business for a week? Can I actually motivate myself and discipline myself so that I wake up in the morning and get some things done? And I started working towards that spreadsheet. And one of the things that I realized was like, okay, if I leave and it goes terribly, I have at least, say, a year of runway just for myself, because the speaking business is very low startup costs. if I'm terrible at it and I fail miserably, within 6 or 9 months, I can then start to look for another job. And figuring that I had P&G on the resume, had IT as a background, and had some social skills, I was like, okay, I can find another job in tech in some way. And so those were the two things that kind of helped, was having, recognizing that there is a plan B in the back of my mind if I need it, not planning for it, but recognizing that it existed. But more importantly, having this spreadsheet that I was working towards. And by the time I checked off all the things, that was like the next day I went in and talked to my manager. And I left a couple of months later. I didn't leave immediately because we did some like slower transition stuff on a project that I was working on. But those two things made me feel a lot more comfortable, where it wasn't like, this is a huge plunge. This is like very much baby steps into the water of seeing that it will work.
So no Jerry Maguire mission statement to walk out of the company.
No mission statement. No later Tom Cruise jumping on a couch.
Oh man.
No HR incidents on the way out. No, it was a methodical, and it took about 2 years or so from the time that I was like, okay, I think that works as a company that I want to build, to the time that I actually left. It was about 2 years, but that's the low risk. That's the build it up over time, build a side hustle into something that, you can leave for kind of process.
Yeah, that's it, man. I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I've talked a little bit about that, like kind of my journey, and I was in the Army. And so I had like a specific time period commitment. And in that whole time that I was active duty, I was like trying to get other things on the side working. And so that by the time I did quit, I wasn't able to replace my income, which is what a lot of people recommend. But I was like, no, I think I can do this. And if I can't, there's, these backups and stuff like that. So we'll see what happens. But it's funny. I didn't do an actual checklist, but I guess more of like a mental one. So everything you're saying is definitely resonate with me. It seems like an appropriate way to, again, for those who are listening, like take note. Like, I think there's some things there. It's like the discipline to work on your own when you don't have to, and then it's the ability to like kind of put out ideas, to be somebody who like produces and ships, and to be able to do that on the side while you still have a full-time job. Like it's just smart business, no matter what you do.
Yeah. And everything is, it's the iterative approach to things, because you never know what is going to resonate with the marketplace. And for me, that was incredibly valuable, of having Humor That Works just as a blog and as sharing things. Okay, like what do people resonate with? And it took me, in that 2 years, part of what I was learning is that no one cares about humor in the workplace. Like, there's maybe 1,000 global monthly searches for humor in the workplace as a phrase, but they do care about communication skills. They do care about leadership. They do care about stress management or employee engagement. And these are all things that, humor can solve, but it's not what people are searching for. So that understanding of, it's maybe seems simplistic now, but leading with benefits over features, or making sure that I'm communicating in a language of my potential clients as opposed to what I understand. Like all of those things I learned while still kind of building things up, as opposed to needing to learn it while also having this immense pressure to try to make money right away.
Right. And also just the idea of humor that works, like in the context of kind of what you're describing there, talk to the target market. It's also like, it's a difference that kind of matters. It's like, you could just say, yeah, I help teams with communication and leadership. And then by the time you're finished with the sentence, everybody's asleep. But, this angle, it's like, okay, wait, I want to hear more. Right. Because you kind of hit the nail on the head. So again, kudos to that. But I want to shift directions here a little bit to the Humor That Works, the book that you wrote. Tell me a little bit about this engineering of humor. What is humor? How do we actually engineer it?
Yeah, so the idea behind humor engineering is, just like a computer science engineer solves problems using computers and technology and programming and all that, the idea for me as a humor engineer is that I solve workplace issues using humor. And so a lot of that involves kind of employee things. So whether it's for you as an individual, how do you motivate yourself to get work done? And, part of that is if you make your work a little bit more fun, you're a little bit more willing to do it. So when you can gamify your work or play your work in different ways, you are more invested in it. Or, as a way to relieve stress. Or we can use it as a tool to communicate in a way that people actually pay attention, because the average person is bombarded with 5,000 plus messages per day, and they send and receive 112 emails per day. And so, like, how do you actually get people to pay attention? Oh, when you get people to laugh, they're now paying attention. And when they're paying attention, now you can get them to, click on something or buy something or act on something. And so the whole mindset, the whole idea is, okay, how do we improve the workplace? How do we ultimately get better results across across kind of what we see as the 5 skills of work, of being able to execute, being able to think, creating a strategic plan, being able to communicate, or articulating the intelligence that you have, being able to connect on a human level, so that's emotional intelligence and empathy, and then being able to lead or influence people. Those are kind of the 5 core skills of work, no matter what you do. So then we're calling humor the missing skill, so how you can do each one of those things in a more effective way.
What are some of your tips then, in terms of like if somebody's listening, that they could take away from this to effectively do that? Like to incorporate humor into the workplace in a way that's we'll say productive.
Yeah, so I think it starts with what we call a humor map. And so your map is your medium, your audience, and your purpose. So medium is, how are you going to execute your humor? Is it in an email? Is it in a phone call? Is it in a conversation, right? Because that, if you say something sarcastic, but it's in person, you can kind of smile with it or something like that. But if you send that out in an email, people are like, why is that person so mean or so aggressive, right? So your medium impacts your message. The second piece is your audience, and this is like who you know, or who that person is, what they know, what they need, what they expect, and what your relationship is, right? You probably have friends that you kind of poke fun of, or banter back and forth a little bit. Like, my group of friends in college, where it's like, if we didn't make fun of you, it meant we didn't like you. But that doesn't mean that you're going to take that same level of banter with a client that you're meeting for the very first time and immediately start, ragging on them. So your audience matters. And the final, most important piece is your purpose. Like, why do you want to use humor? Because this isn't about just using humor for the sake of humor. It's not just like everyone should have fun. It's, okay, what objective do you want to achieve, and how can you use humor to help you achieve that objective? And the answer is, humor may not always be the right answer, but oftentimes something small can help. So, for example, for entrepreneurs, one thing is managing stress, right? We know that stress by itself is not a bad thing, right? Stress is how we grow. It's how we improve our capacity. But as an engineer who study a lot about productivity, I've learned that it's very difficult to be productive if you are dead, right? Or if you're like sick and tired, if you're burned out, stressed out, worn out, very difficult to be productive. So we can use humor strategically throughout the day to re-energize, to recharge. And one of the important things to recognize with humor is that it is more broad than comedy. When we think of humor, we so often think of, laughter, of jokes, of, comedy thing. That's an important component of humor, but it's also a little bit more broad than that. It's something a little bit different, maybe something even a little bit silly that causes amusement. And so when we're thinking about it, as you're thinking about, okay, how can I use humor to relieve stress throughout the day? It's like, oh, well, let me make sure that I listen to the In the Trenches podcast on my way home so that I relieve some stress and show up more present for my family when I get there. Or, one of the things that I'll do is, have kind of some videos lined up, because I'm an introvert, right? So I love talking to people, have no problem with it, but I have to recharge afterwards. So after I have meetings, after this meeting, I'll go and watch probably, a quick, 5-minute comedy clip on YouTube. Just these small things that are used to kind of make sure that we're re-energizing throughout the day is one kind of simple strategy for, increasing our effectiveness in the workplace.
So in a culture that we live in now, where it seems like every company, even tech companies, are kind of like trying to out virtue signal the next company. Mm-hmm. How does humor work? Because, a movie like Ladybugs probably wouldn't be made today. And so and not that that's like the pinnacle of comedy, but it's one of those things where I kind of reflect on. Are you talking
about the Leonardo DiCaprio classic Ladybug, where he played on a women's soccer team? That Ladybugs?
Yeah. Was that Leonardo DiCaprio?
Yeah, that was Leonardo DiCaprio. Yeah, I love that. That's the movie that you're pulling out. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a different. We do live in a different time, I think so. There's a question that you're asking, kind of how do we adjust to today's standards? Sorry, I interrupted because I was so excited about Ladybugs.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'm glad it was a reference that works, because, I mean, again, this is like seeing stuff like that. I'm like, oh, it's interesting. Like even movies that were made like 10 or 20 years ago. I'm like, yeah, that wouldn't be made today, because everybody's got to push some kind of virtue in everything they do. And so now all of a sudden, the stuff that makes humor, in my opinion, funny, which is usually the edgy stuff, not antagonistic, not degrading at all, and certainly not sarcasm. I think everybody needs to stop with sarcasm. I'm saying that seriously, not sarcastically, because I think it's like just a terrible form of humor. But what I'm getting at is, we live in an age of this kind of PC culture with companies, for sure. It's like ever present. I think some people walk on eggshells. So how does humor actually work in that context?
Yeah, I think an important kind of thing to keep in mind, because it's a great question and it's a concern that a lot of people have. And one of the things to keep in mind is using humor in the workplace. Your goal is not to become a famous comedian as a result of it, right? So yeah, if you are Anthony Jeselnik, who still pushes the boundary with a lot of things and what would be considered an aggressive form of humor, he can absolutely do in a comedy club. There's a lot of different types of humor that you can use, say, as catharsis with your friends. Like, we've done some work with emergency first responders, with the FBI, with people at the Red Cross, people who work in very, very serious, areas or very serious roles. A lot of times they have a darker humor, a darker in-group of humor that they share with each other, and it's a very important form of catharsis, a way to relieve stress. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's one that you're going to proactively use in the workplace, because the goal isn't, again, to be seen as that, super funny person and be told, oh, you should, do stand-up comedy. The goal is to get better results. And so it's important to understand that because of the shifting changes in culture and how audiences, how the person receiving it might receive it or how they might take it, yeah, absolutely. You want to stick to some more positive forms of humor. So what we recommend is typically positive, inclusive humor. So this is, team building type things. It's more like Ellen DeGeneres and less George Carlin in terms of kind of like style. And then you can use also self-defeating humor. So self-defeating humor, self-deprecating humor is a negative form of humor, but the target is yourself. As opposed to targeting someone else, you're targeting yourself and kind of poking fun at a little bit of, something about you. So for example, when I speak, I'll sometimes reference that, people think I could look kind of like a skinny Hugh Jackman. And so I'll take that a little bit further and I'll joke and say, that it's true. I am a feeble person. I was born 8.3 pounds and stayed that way till I was 15 years old. Right. And so the target in that case of that joke is myself. And self-defeating humor can be great if you're in a high status position. So if you're the one presenting, or if you're the CEO or senior leader in an organization, and if it's used sparingly. Right? You don't want it to be the only style of humor that you use. And this is an important call out for women, because at least in one study, they found that when men used humor in the workplace, they were met with a positive response, something like 80 or 90% of the time. And when women used humor in the workplace, they were met with a positive response only 20% of the time. But in that same study, they found that about 80% of the humor that men used was off the cuff, so kind of just conversational in the moment. And 70% of the humor that women used was self-defeating, was poking fun of themselves. And again, when you consistently use self-defeating humor, people start to worry like, wait, is this no longer a joke? Is this a cry for help? Is this a pity party? What's going on? And so that style of humor becomes very important.
They didn't also just discover that women aren't as funny as men?
Yeah, no, that's not the case. Like, and it's been a stereotype about different things, and it's just an inaccurate stereotype. For me, I think Ellen DeGeneres is one of my favorite comedians. I think she's hysterical. Same thing with like Hannah Gatsby is doing some very cool things in comedy. Wanda Sykes has been hilarious for years. So like, yeah, there's easy, you can point to Tina Fey. There's thousands of people you could list off that are hilarious comedians that disprove that.
So it's this idea. So let's zoom in on the inclusive aspect, because I have thought about this. Like, how can I engineer humor like in a positive way? Because it's like, so I like almost like Vince Vaughn style. I was just thinking about like his style, like what I like about it. It's like he's so optimistic and upbeat and positive. And so, and I feel like even in his movies and stuff, I mean, maybe there's some where he's not like that, but it's always like the jokes are always like, even like riffing on something in a positive way. So like maybe break that down. Is there anything I can think about like from a structure standpoint of like, I guess thinking about how I can make my messages, especially for people who have cause like, and let me get it, there's a long-winded way to ask this, but like, I know, yeah, the idea of like, you don't want to degrade people or talk down about them. Like that's not good humor. Like, again, maybe in like stand up or something like that. But I like this idea of like being positive and optimistic, and you use the word kind of like inclusive in it. So I'm wondering, Lo, like, are there any pragmatic or practical tips we can think about, like in terms of because I'm thinking about how I would use this for like email marketing and messages, and social media marketing and stuff like that. I don't know if it applies beyond just conversational stuff in the workplace too, but maybe you can kind of shed some light on that.
Yeah, I think that it absolutely does. And I think the easiest way to start to do that, or the most practical way, is to borrow from improvisation. And so the fundamental mindset of improvisation is called yes and, right? If you take an improv class, you will learn it, and there's chances are for the people listening, they've probably heard it at some point at this point. But yes and is the mindset of improv. It's how we as improvisers get on stage and make things up off the top of our head and make it seem like it makes sense, right? And the idea of yes and isn't about that you agree with everything and that everything is perfect or anything like that, but it's a mindset of building off of whatever has already existed. So, I could step out into an improv scene and be like, oh my God, there's a dog over there. And the other person can be like, yes, but it's really just a rock, right? And then now you're watching an improv scene. Right. Yeah. It's completely that person is blocked, and you're watching an improv scene about two people argue about something that doesn't exist. Right. It's improv. We're making it up. That's very different than stepping out into an improv scene and being like, oh my God, there's a dog over there. And the other person be like, yes, and there's a monkey riding on it. Yes, and that monkey is coming this way. Yeah. Right. You're just going back and forth. And at its most basic level, it's about saying yes and to each idea. So one, that's an easy thing to do in conversation. So as an introvert, I've had to develop my own strategies of how do I network with people? How do I have conversations with people? And one of the strategies is to just yes and whatever the last person said, as a way to make it more positive, inclusive. And so that works even with, quintessential small talk. So for example, if someone is like, how about this weather, right? Like quintessential small talk question, you can be like, you wouldn't necessarily say these exact phrase, but the mindset of yes and there of like, yes, how about this 90-degree weather here in New York City? If you weren't at this event right now, this networking event, what would you be doing to stay out of the heat, right? Oh, I would go and swim, or I'd go on my bike, or I'd stay indoors and start watching, Stranger Things season 3 or whatever it is. Now you've turned a conversation about weather into about someone's hobby, and that's getting it a little bit more interesting, building into something a little bit more compelling. And so that simple mindset of yes and is a great way to be more positive and be more inclusive. It's also kind of an extrapolation of how you create humor with different ideas, right? So there's within UCB, so an improv school based in New York and LA, they take it a little bit further and they teach something called if this is true, what else is true? Which is really just kind of a specific way of doing yes and. But the idea is, if this one concept, if this joke or this idea or this observation is true, what else could be true? So, for example, the example that I shared in my TEDx talk is that it took me going to the state of Florida to realize that the rapper Flo Rida got his name from his home state of Florida, and he put a space in it. Right? Does that make sense? Did you already know that? Was I like completely off mark of that? But like Flow Rider is just Florida with the space in it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've never really thought about it, but yes, that sounds right.
Yeah. So, right. So, and I looked it up, and it's true. Like he was born in Florida, and so he got his name, he put his space in it. So starts with an observation that if this is true, what else is true? Or a yes and application of that is to say, okay, maybe there's other brands who could get their brand name by putting spaces in the state that they're from. So for example, there could be like a Hispanic travel agency in Dover called De La Ware. Right? Or even dumber than that is there could be a, female internet detective who is married in Biloxi that goes by Mrs. IPPI. Right? So it's a silly example of applying that mindset of if this is true, what else is true, or that yes and. So if you're in a conversation with someone and someone like says something that's kind of funny and you want to be positive and inclusive, just yes and whatever they said, and that helps you to generate new ideas. And that mindset of yes and also applies, to your point, not just in conversation, but say in marketing. Right? So like say, oh, I have to send out these marketing newsletters. So yes, I'm going to send out these newsletters, and I might as well find ways to make them more fun. So how can I combine these two things? How can I, Stranger Things has recently, come out. And so maybe there's a big buzz around that. So how can I maybe send out a newsletter that is like the Stranger Things of my business? And now I'm going to connect each one of the things that I wanted to make in this point related to Stranger Things. And now it's a little bit more compelling because it's not just your boring marketing content, but, connected to something that people tend to care or like a lot of.
Right. So it's like, so part of this then kind of using those structures, which I like that is helpful, is like kind of like positive affirmation of like whatever the statement was that is like true, kind of acceptance of it. And then riffing on it again, not shutting it down, but riffing on it and like expanding on it. Kind of,
yeah, and taking it in the direction that you like. Because sometimes people hear yes and like, does that mean I have to be a yes man and agree with everything? Right. And it's like, no, take whatever small component you like and build off of that, and then you start to go in a direction based on what you're interested in, as opposed to just blindly agreeing with what this person is talking about.
Right. Do you think Michael Scott's humor from The Office would work in an office these days?
That's a great question, and probably not. There's some aggressive forms of humor. And especially earlier on in The Office, some inappropriate forms. And he's a great example of someone who is using humor not to get better results, but for validation.
Right.
Right. And that's a huge difference between he's trying to be seen as a funny and likable person, as opposed to thinking, hey, let me use humor in this instance as a way to build, better rapport with one of my clients, or let me use humor in this area to, help people relieve stress.
Yeah. I was just thinking about that.
It's a great question.
I guess the distinction being here too, when we think about shows and TVs and one of the things you mentioned early on was like, you're not trying to be a comedian. And it's like, part of the trope or the thing that makes that show funny is how bad his humor actually is, how ineffective it is from a leadership standpoint or from an office manager standpoint, I guess is part of the humor within that series itself.
Oh yeah, it's entirely built on the awkwardness of the moments and the awkward looks to the camera from Jim and Pam constantly. Like it's entirely built around that.
Right. So in real life, our goal isn't to create the type of environment where if there was a camera, people would look at it awkwardly. I guess
exactly. Yeah, it's a great distinction.
Okay. So this is good. This has been good. I've really enjoyed this. Is there anything else that you think like either from like a human engineering standpoint of like comedy, from like a office environment thing, like things we haven't necessarily covered right now, but you think are important when it comes to humor, in terms of like integrating it into the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think just a reminder that again, the map as the really starting point is being, intentional and deliberate about it. I think, kind of connected to that is that you also don't always have to be the creator of humor, right? You don't have to be the brilliant comedian that comes up with all the witty lines, but instead you can be the shepherd of humor, or the conduit of humor. So, if you find a, TEDx talk that you really like that's also really funny and makes a point that you've been trying to make to your employees, send an email to them and have them watch the talk. You don't have to like try to repeat all of those things or come up with the jokes, yourself, or, this is memes in the workplace, or, on Slack, GIFs through there.
I was just going to ask you about that. Memes. What's your take on it? I mean, this is like I feel like at least one new method that's pretty commonplace, especially with like remote workplaces and stuff like that, like memes. And again, from a marketing standpoint, I think they're pretty effective too. But what are your thoughts on the use of memes?
Yeah, I think absolutely they can be. So there was, the John Travolta GIF of him from Pulp Fiction, where he's just kind of like looking around from side to side. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, so it's pretty popular GIF. So there was a guy who cold emailed me about some service that I didn't respond to at all. And a week later, he sent me an email where the entire content of the email was just that GIF. or gift, depending on how you want to pronounce it, right? But was just that. And it made me laugh because it was clearly the, John Travolta kind of looking from side to side as in like, where's the response? Are you going to respond to me? What's going on? And it prompted a response from me because it made me laugh, right? He didn't, he's not Quentin Tarantino. He did not, come up with that. He's not John Travolta, but he found this thing that he can then leverage in this way to kind of make a point that he wanted to. And so I responded to him. I didn't need the service that he was talking about, but he got a response from me because he provided me a smile. And there's, I've done some work with IBM, and part of their sales mantra is, their belief is that people buy from the first person to provide them value, whether that is in the form of assessment or conversation or understanding, or humor is a way to provide value. If you're a salesperson and you make someone laugh, you show that you understand them and get them kind of on your side, you might be a little bit more willing to be like, I enjoyed this interaction, this experience with this person. I maybe want to use it a little bit more, or interact with them a little bit more and kind of reward them with that, with my business. So I think, for sure I'm on board with kind of means you don't want to overdo it. Just like anything, like humor doesn't replace the work. Right. It's not an excuse to then be like, I'm not going to, I'm not going to really finish that report. I'll just send a funny picture afterwards and it'll be all good. Right. It's not replacing the work. Instead, it's about how you do your work so that you get better results.
Right. And there's something I guess, just like on a tip for those who want to be humorous is like, there's such thing as like playing like a joke being played out. And so like, I guess like the joke would be on you if you're that person who just keeps hammering in the memes. I guess there's a point though where something goes from funny to not funny, but then I guess if you just keep going, maybe it's funny after that. There's actually, a persistence to it. Yeah,
there are, I don't know. I kind of almost like I said, there's almost a math to comedy. And so I think it's a theorem. So there's a rule of 3 within comedy that's pretty well known, that things are funnier in threes. So you do something, then you can kind of call it back once, and then you maybe call it back again. And then just kind of run its course. If you do it like a 4th or a 5th time, it starts to, kind of get boring. The 6th time, people are kind of like getting upset. The 7th time, they're, maybe getting ready to walk out on you. 8, they're like actually standing up. And then 9, there's something about comedy that as you do something over and 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 over again, it becomes funny again because you're breaking the expectation that you would do it. It's called the rule of 9, or sometimes called the rule of like 68, or also the rake bit. So it's kind of like if you've ever seen Family Guy, that chicken fight that they do that always goes on far too long. Like it's just this idea that sometimes overdoing it becomes funny again. And maybe be a slightly dangerous one to play with in the workplace, but you're right. It is
don't experiment with that one on the first go. Right?
Exactly. But that being said, there is tremendous value in creating a framework for humor. So, for example, I think, I don't know if you read Next Draft is a newsletter by Dave Pell. But it's just basically the top 10 stories for each day. So it's a news digest. But he does a great job he incorporates kind of a little bit of wordplay or puns or that kind of thing in each one of his headlines. And so what it does is it creates a consistent use of humor. So it's one of the few emails that I read every single day because, 1, it provides value in terms of keeping me up to date on news, but 2, I know he does it in a way that's more engaging than just, the normal kind of summary. And so when you create that consistent use of humor, you're making people want to join. And I found that with both my meetings and my emails when I was at P&G. I remember, so I used to include email or jokes at the end of each one of my emails, each one of my status reports at P&G as a project manager. And I remember coming into the office one day and I had a bunch of replies to the same email. And I was like, what did I do? Like, did I mess something up? Did I like cuss in the email? What went wrong? And I had forgotten to include a joke at the bottom. And so people responded. They're like, hey, where were the jokes? I'm used to reading jokes in this email. Like, are you still doing the jokes? What happened? Like, so it was something that I didn't know that people were necessarily like attached to. But when I didn't do it, they're like, hey, I open your emails because I'm going to get a joke. As a project manager, to know that they opened the email and scrolled to the bottom and were proactively looking for it. Like, I don't know if they actually read the bulk of the actual status report email, but to get those 2 things is a pretty good success. So that consistent use of humor makes people want to pay attention to what you're talking about and helps them stay engaged. when you create that framework where maybe the joke changes each time or how you execute that humor changes, but the fact that it's consistent in there, people are going to want to interact with you.
Less humor related question before maybe we wrap up. How do you deal with people who try to pull in political stuff into the workspace and think it's funny, but it's really not funny at all? How do you deal with those people?
I think so. There's a couple of different strategies. One, from a coaching standpoint, right? Recognizing that using humor is not an excuse to then talk about topics that you would not talk about otherwise, to target someone that you wouldn't target otherwise. And, the third way that humor can be inappropriate is that it comes at an inappropriate time. So there's a coaching element that comes into it in terms of what's appropriate to talk about and what's not. From a pure kind of listening standpoint to it, one of the most effective ways to kind of counteract or disarm someone who is using either political or, say, offensive jokes in the workplace is to play dumb, right? If someone says a racist joke to you and you ask them, I don't get it, why is that funny? For them to have to explain them being racist to someone or them being sexist or them kind of saying, oh, no, it's funny because of this thing, it usually it can be a good way to disarm things because they don't want to have to explain that, no, the basis of this humor is because of something inappropriate.
And that I would say is probably the 1%. I've never seen that happen in my life, but maybe it does. And so that seems like a really extreme 1% example, but something that's more common, I think, is as an example, as it's okay to completely talk trash about the current president, as an example, when half of the population voted for him. And so, and people do it again, I think they do it unironically, but that's acceptable in the workplace. It seems how do you deal with something like that? That's the typical thing that I've seen. And I'm not even in a workplace, but just hearing stories of people who are in workplaces and seeing this stuff.
Yeah, I think that, it comes down to, you want to be in an organization where you can have open and honest conversations and communication with people. And so if someone says something that you're I don't feel like that's appropriate, that's not a topic that I enjoy, talking about or joking about, should be a fair response that you can share with anything, right? Because, people need kind of that feedback sometimes to know. Honestly, it's a great question, and it's one that does create a little bit of challenge. And it doesn't necessarily mean as soon as someone makes that comment that you do it right there and scold them in front of it might be in front of a bunch of people. It might be kind of pulling them aside a little bit later and being especially if you're the leader and know that there are people that feel a certain way in the organization, there is value to pulling someone aside and saying, hey, I appreciate the attempt of using humor. There's, tremendous value of using humor in the workplace, but, just so you know, there's appropriate ways to do it, and that may make some people uncomfortable. I think open and honest conversation is a way to go. Right.
And definitely not responding tit for tat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, yeah, you have it. Because you don't want it to then blow up into an argument for sure.
Right. Okay. No, this is good stuff. Well, I will say this has been very both entertaining and enlightening, Andrew. I really appreciate the insights. Where can people reach out to connect with you, find out more about you, and just learn more about what you do?
Yeah, so if they're interested in learning more about humor in the workplace, they can go to humorthatworks.com, where we have a ton of free resources there in terms of the form of blog posts and a newsletter on kind of using humor in the workplace. We also have the book is available there, an online course, and then also information about our workshops that we do with individual companies and some of the speaking engagements that we do. So if they want to learn more about that, they can. If they want to connect with me personally, I am Drew Tarvin on all social media. So that's DREWTARVIN. And yeah, you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and recently discovered I still have a MySpace page. So if MySpace is your jam,
well, let's bring it back.
Yeah, right. Who knows? Awesome. I mean, it still exists, and there are some people still on it. It's more, directly in the music space, but yeah, you can reach out on MySpace.
I love it. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for your time. I do encourage people to go check it out. Not only will you learn something, it'll be just as entertaining as anything else you could find out there, and you will learn something. So I highly encourage people going to check out Andrew's work. Andrew, thank you so much for being on In the Trenches.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Are you trying to grow your online business, but struggling to get new customers consistently and predictably? Are you tired of working nonstop only to see your income plateau? Are you ready to step off the hustle hamster wheel, as I call it, and step onto a path of predictable profit that you can scale as much or as little as you want? Don't worry, you're not alone. I've been there. When I first got started, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. So I started reading blogs and listening to podcasts by people I respected and wanted to learn from. I slowly but surely put their recommendations into practice. But because I wanted to do it all myself, maybe you're something like that, right? You love to do it by yourself, learn through trial and error. Well, bottom line is it took forever. Results were unpredictable when I was first getting started. I wasn't sure where to spend my time, money, and energy. And shiny penny syndrome got the best of me on more than one occasion. For many entrepreneurs, the amount I sacrificed, working literally nonstop in some cases in my spare time, and 12 and 14-hour days routinely after going full-time, combined with the endless fog of war, aka that uncertainty that I had to deal with at all times because I was going it alone, I think that would have been enough for most entrepreneurs to throw in the towel. But I was persistent, focused, and I stayed humble. Day after day, I worked to grow the traffic to my website, increase my list of subscribers, and generate a healthy living for my ebooks, e-courses, and other digital products. At least that was the goal. But maybe more important than the work was that I paid attention to what I was doing, including what worked and what didn't. Eventually, I discovered a predictable pattern of growth. And so what I did was I just doubled down on those things, and I scrapped or sidelined the other things that weren't working so well. Finally, 2 years after resigning my commission as a captain in the Army and going full-time on my online business front with my blog, with my podcast, etc., I replaced my income with digital product income. 2 years. And so if that's where it stopped, I would have been happy with it. I would have been happy with the results. I wouldn't have complained. I would have been very content just replacing my income. But the bottom line is it was so much work. I wanted to, see if it could go somewhere else, right? So I just kept doing what I was doing, but better, faster, and more effectively. Again, just kind of applying the same system that I discovered from seeing these patterns emerge, right? So I implemented it, I kept doing it. And eventually replacing my income turned into doubling my income. And then that turned into a little bit more and a little bit more. But not just that, it afforded me the freedom to dictate my day and also choose the projects I want to work on the schedule and on the timeline I want, and to work with the people I want to work with. And to me, that's like a whole new level of freedom, especially coming from the military. It's something I've never really had that level of complete autonomy until I became my own boss. I started my own business, and until it became profitable enough for me to start to take a step back and actually reap the rewards of it. Because it's not all just working. And I do believe it's hard work. And I'll always say that. Nothing about doing this stuff is easy. But at the same time, you've got to reap the rewards at some point and take some of that profit, even if you're just reinvesting it into new assets and things like that. Bottom line is, it can't just be work, right? Entrepreneurship and business is about that result that occurs, the value you've created and the profit, that piece of value that you've captured, okay? And you want to be able to reap the rewards of that profit, of that value, that little sliver of value that you get to capture, that you get to net, right? You want to be able to take advantage of that. Otherwise, the entrepreneurship game really does become just a grind. And for, I think, a lot of entrepreneurs, unfortunately, it becomes meaningless, and that's when they quit. Well, for me, I love this stuff. I really, truly do. I mean, it is my thing. And so that's why I didn't just stop where I was at. I've stayed committed to learning everything I can about all aspects of this online business world and this online marketing world. And I do this through real world application. In other words, I'm currently growing several online businesses, and I'm always putting my ideas to the test in real time with my own money, with my own time and energy, oftentimes with employees, a lot of some stuff more advanced, some stuff more simple, but so varying levels of complexity, and again, in different spaces, different niches. And I can say, bottom line, I've always loved the startup hustle, but I gotta say, it's nice to now be in a position where I can get big results with much less effort, thanks to having built the foundation of my business the right way. And again, I did it all through trial and error, but I don't think that that's the way that everyone needs to do it. And in fact, looking back on it, if I had to redo it, I don't know if I would. It was so difficult to just go it alone and try to figure everything out by myself. So one of the things I've tried to do is give back with this podcast, with my blog, and with my newsletter. But maybe even more rewarding than any of this stuff, while I've enjoyed all of it, I think the thing that I'm enjoying the most, that I find most engaging and rewarding, is the premium business mastermind and coaching program I run called 100K Academy. Inside 100K Academy, I help ambitious entrepreneurs who are very driven and excited to be doing what they're doing. I help them grow their reach, their influence, and their profit using my proprietary marketing system. That's the same one I use to scale my own online businesses from 0 to multiple 6 figures and beyond. And the same system I use to help my clients reach the New York Times, Wall Street Journal bestseller list, set Kickstarter funding records, and create viral product launches that have turned into predictable revenue streams. So lots and lots of case studies that you could find at tommorkes.com. If you're curious, just go to tommorkes.com/about, and that'll get you started. Most importantly, this system is one that 100K Academy members and alumni have used to achieve tremendous results, like Alexa, who used it to have her most profitable year ever, or Tina, who used it to make 5 figures from a sales funnel that she can now replicate and scale, and that's exactly what she's doing. Or Carrie, who made over $75,000 in just 7 days. And the crazy part about his story was that his online business was actually a side hustle up until that first profitable launch, which he has then been able to grow and scale. And he subsequently quit his job following that very successful week. And I think that that has been just a game changer for Carrie and the life he's living and the work he gets to do and the impact he gets to make on the world because of the great work he's doing now, because he was able to figure out a system that would get him the targeted traffic, the subscribers, the sales to grow a profitable online business. Bottom line, if you want to grow your online business from 6 to 7 figures, but you flatlined or you're struggling, or you just want to be told what to do and when to do it and in what order, right? And you want a system that is predictable and scalable and isn't just, another shiny penny, but actually will fit right into your business. It plugs in and is something that you can truly grow. I want you to go to tommorkes.com/academy. That's tommorkes.com/academy. Academy is spelled ACADEMY. Go to tommorkes.com/academy, and you'll find a page on my website with more details about 100K Academy, the business mastermind coaching program I run, as well as instructions on what to do next. Again, that's tommorkes.com/academy. And if you're serious about growing your reach, influence, and profit, just follow the instructions and we'll be in touch, okay? Again, tommorkes.com/academy. Go ahead and head over.